Winning the trial, Joanna decided to check on the summer house her husband had purchased. And upon hearing a conversation between her mother-in-law and her lover in the gazebo, Joanna walked slowly along the sidewalk, feeling the tension that had gripped her for the past few hours gradually dissipate. The trial was finally over, granting her a breath of fresh air after the stifling atmosphere of the courtroom. She had been acquitted in this absurd case that had haunted her like a nightmare for the past couple of months. Charlotte, the wife of influential businessman Donald Benson, accused Joanna, a surgical nurse at a private clinic, of secretly administering herbal infusions to her husband. Allegedly, it was to undermine his health and seize his fortune. The courtroom was filled with a tense atmosphere. Charlotte's lawyer, a pompous, self-assured man with fox-like eyes, struggled to present Joanna as a cunning schemer who used her position to ensnare the wealthy patient. He showered legal jargon like it was a cornucopia, accusing Joanna of violating professional ethics, unauthorized treatment, and even attempted poisoning. Joanna Campbell, the lawyer's voice rang out, as a medical professional, you understood perfectly well that self-prescribing herbal remedies could have negative consequences for the patient. You acted out of selfish motives, essentially trying to take control over Mr. Benson's life and property. Joanna clenched her fists, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. She genuinely cared for Donald Benson. This businessman was a complex patient, having undergone several serious surgeries. His condition required special attention. Joanna felt pity for Donald, as she saw how his wife was distant and showed little interest in his health. Sometimes, seeing the businessman yearn for simple communication and care made her want to alleviate his suffering with the simple folk remedies she had known since childhood, thanks to her grandmother. Moreover, Joanna sincerely believed that herbal infusions could calm his nerves and improve his sleep. She had no selfish motives. Joanna Campbell, the sharp voice of Mrs. Benson's lawyer, cut through the air again. Tell me, does your herbal remedy have approval from the Ministry of Health? Were clinical trials conducted to prove its effectiveness? Do you not understand that by interfering with the treatment prescribed by a doctor, you endanger the patient's life? Joanna, trying to remain calm, replied, drawing on her knowledge and experience. Donald Benson suffered from insomnia and anxiety, which significantly worsened his condition after surgery. Standard medications were ineffective. I, as a nurse, tried to find a way to alleviate his suffering. The herbal blends I prepared were gentle and safe, allowing him to rest a little. Your Honor, calmly but firmly added her lawyer, a young and talented attorney named Matthew, my client acted solely in the patient's interest. In fact, she sought to improve his condition, and no evidence of selfish motives has been presented. An awkward pause hung in the air. Meanwhile, Matthew skillfully dismantled all the accusations, countering them with facts and logic. He proved that Charlotte herself hindered her husband's proper treatment and presented witnesses who confirmed Joanna's care and her desire to help. Fortunately, after patiently listening to all sides, the judge issued a fair ruling, thereby acquitting Joanna to the delight of her friends and colleagues. In view of the lack of evidence of the defendant's guilt, the court finds her not guilty on all counts, announced the judge, and applause erupted in the courtroom. Joanna felt drained, like a squeezed lemon. All this time, she had lived in anticipation of the verdict, fearing she might lose her job, her reputation, or even her freedom. But that was all behind her. Upon leaving the courthouse, Joanna accepted congratulations from her colleagues and thanked Matthew for his help, trying not to think about how her husband hadn't found the time to support her in court. It was understandable. As always, business, negotiations, and deals of the century, predictably so. Also, after her release, Joanna deliberately avoided the company of Charlotte Benson, who she now considered her number one enemy. The young nurse didn't want to escalate the situation and pretended not to notice the significant glances from the furious businesswoman. Thoughts of her ordeal and the injustice she had faced spun in her mind. At home, her husband and mother-in-law were already waiting for her. Elton greeted her with a smile, but in his eyes, Joanna sensed something strange, as if he was hiding a worry. Joanna, are you okay? How did it go? Everything fine? Caroline Campbell asked with feigned concern. "We were so worried about you." "I'm fine," Joanna replied, trying to hide her exhaustion. "I was acquitted." "That's wonderful," Caroline exhaled with relief. "Now, tell us how it all went." Joanna briefly recounted the main points, avoiding details that might upset her mother-in-law. "We're so glad everything ended well," her husband said, taking her hand. "And I have another surprise for you." "A surprise?" Joanna raised her eyebrows in surprise. "Yes," Elton smiled. "Mom and I bought a summer house. Look, I even hung a bunch of keys on the hook already. 1 key for each of us, and the 4th one as a spare." "A summer house?" Joanna was taken aback. "What summer house?" "Where?" "In the countryside," Elton replied. "It's a very quiet and beautiful place. We can live there when it's warm, there's a river nearby, and the forest is just a stone's throw away. Mushrooms, berries." "In the countryside?" Joanna felt a chill run down her spine. "But why?" "It's a place to relax," Elton explained. "After all this, you need peace. Besides, I spoke with the head of the department, your immediate supervisor. Well, you'll be allowed to return to work, at best, in a month." Caroline immediately chimed in. "Yes, Joanna, there's fresh air, silence, you can rest from the hustle and bustle. It's no small feat to win such a case. You should have also claimed moral damages from that rich woman." After hearing her mother-in-law's syrupy voice, Joanna felt even more uncertain. She didn't understand why her husband had made such a decision and sensed something strange was happening. Why hadn't he consulted her? "When can we move in?" Joanna asked, trying to keep her growing anxiety at bay. "This Saturday," Elton replied. "But it's better to pack your things in advance." Joanna nodded, but a warning bell rang in her head, signaling that something was amiss. She knew Elton well enough to realize he was hiding something from her. Her husband had never made spontaneous decisions, he always planned ahead. And now, a house in the middle of nowhere. A sudden impulse to become a country dweller? In the evening, when Elton left for a meeting with an overseas investor, Joanna asked her mother-in-law directly, "So why exactly do I have to move? Elton hasn't explained anything properly." Caroline hesitated for a moment and then said, "Oh, sweetheart, we told you, you need a break from all these troubles." "But why now?" Joanna pressed on. "Well, the thing is, after all this, it's become unsafe for you in the city." "Unsafe?" Joanna frowned. "What, could someone harm me?" "Well, for example, Charlotte Benson," Caroline said this name almost in a whisper. "Do you think she'll forgive you for beating her in court?" "The court acquitted me," Joanna exclaimed indignantly. "And that businesswoman can't do anything to me." "Oh. She's rich and powerful," Caroline said with a note of worry in her voice. "Don't underestimate her. That's why Elton just wants to protect you. Trust me, he's really worried." A chill ran down Joanna's spine. But she refrained from asking further questions. She understood that Caroline Campbell was clearly hiding something. And judging by the circumstances, the whole story with the herbal remedies and the trial was just the tip of the iceberg. "I'll have to check out this summer house when I get the chance. And Elton is doing well. He knows how to act quickly when necessary. He even called the department head already. And why didn't Mr. Morgan tell me about the 1-month suspension? Or was he planning to do that when I came back to work? How thoughtful of him, to say the least," Joanna thought on her way to the bedroom. She no longer felt like talking to her mother-in-law. Elton was no better. As usual, he rushed off to negotiations just when she needed his support and involvement the most. He had been doing this more and more often lately, even though there seemed to be no visible reasons for panic. However, she had never really monitored her husband. She tried to build their relationship on mutual understanding and trust. After all, when would she have time to keep an eye on Elton? She spent her days in the operating room. The best surgical nurse in the department. Sounds impressive. The wall is covered with certificates. And her salary is significantly higher than in a regular clinic. At night, Joanna barely slept. Thoughts swirled in her head like leaves in an autumn whirlwind. She still couldn't understand what Elton was hiding. What had compelled him to buy this summer house? And that unnatural joy from Caroline Campbell. She was shining like a polished coin. What was that about? Was she really so happy for her daughter-in-law? No, that didn't seem like her. Something else was definitely going on. Her mother-in-law had always treated Joanna with a coldness. Suddenly, there were these strange affections. One day she reproached her for one thing, the next day for another. Today she pricked Joanna's feelings about being childless. Tomorrow she criticized her desire to adopt a child from an orphanage. The morning greeted her with a chill and a sense of foreboding. Even though the trial was behind her, an unpleasant aftertaste lingered in her soul like a bitter medicine, akin to a sharp splinter. An acquittal was certainly a victory, but it hadn't brought the expected relief. The look from Donald Benson's wife, sharp and full of hatred, still lingered in her mind. And this whole story with the herbs. Joanna was sure it should have helped, as she acted with the best intentions. But who could have foreseen such a turn of events? In the morning, her husband surprisingly was caring and affectionate, but Joanna sensed a strange detachment in his eyes. Just like yesterday, when after the trial, he announced the purchase of a summer house in a picturesque wilderness, far from the hustle and bustle of city life. Caroline was ecstatic, looking forward to summer evenings in the fresh air, but Joanna felt a certain falseness in their joy. It all seemed too artificial and suspicious. "This is all strange," she whispered to herself while making coffee. Buying a summer house. Just like that. Elton, sitting at the table and flipping through the newspaper, merely nodded. "Do you want to go together this weekend?" he suggested, not looking up from his reading. "Maybe," Joanna replied evasively, trying not to reveal her doubts. Inside, her anxiety grew. Her sixth sense screamed that something was wrong. At some point, she wanted to figure out what was going on, to solve this strange puzzle. This need grew stronger than all her other feelings. After breakfast, taking advantage of the fact that Caroline had gone for a manicure at the beauty salon and her husband had left for the office, Joanna decided to act. She stealthily took the car keys and the bunch for the summer house that Elton had carelessly left on the nightstand. But before that, she carefully asked her mother-in-law for the exact address of the purchased summer house. She called a taxi and asked the driver not to turn on the music in the cabin. The road to the village seemed endless, stretching away like a vanishing fox's tail. The taxi driver was nervous, complaining about the poor road and the recent major repairs to the suspension. The dirt road wound between hills and led into the depths of the forest, where silence reigned, interrupted only by the singing of birds. The forest surrounding the village was dense and dark, as if it were hiding some secret. The summer house to which Joanna had finally arrived seemed very strange to her, and nothing like what she had imagined. A wooden house, cracked in places, with a sloping roof, looked more like an abandoned shack than a cozy retreat. The garden was overgrown with weeds, and the flowers in the flower beds had long since wilted. "It's quite neglected," Joanna whispered as she got out of the car. The taxi driver grimaced, as if that phrase were directed at him, and then said, "Ma'am, let's settle the fare, or I'll be swamped with orders. By the way, if you want to return right now, I'll charge half price." Joanna flinched, but after paying for the ride, she decided to stay. Watching the departing car, she walked around the house, examining everything with the attention of an experienced antiquities researcher: the old, creaking windows, the crooked door, the overgrown bushes barely revealing the pathways. A sharp, unseasonably cold wind pierced her to the bone. Joanna involuntarily shrank back, as if sensing something bad was about to happen. She entered the house. The smell of dust and dampness hit her nose. "Something's not right here," Joanna muttered. Inside, everything was just as it was outside, neglected and old. In one of the rooms, she found an old, dusty box containing a stack of photographs. Several of them captured Elton with another woman young, with full, luscious lips and a bright, white smile. In one picture, the couple was at the beach, in another, they were in a restaurant, in each other's embrace. On the back of one of the photographs, someone, presumably Elton, had written a woman's name. "Roxana," Joanna whispered. Tears welled up in her eyes. Her head spun with pain and anger. Everything fell into place. The strange purchase, Elton's detachment, Caroline's forced joy. Suddenly, Joanna heard voices. One of them sounded vaguely familiar. It was her mother-in-law, but what was she doing here? She had promised to go to the salon for a manicure. The voices were coming from the direction of the gazebo, which stood in the depths of the garden under the shade of some fruit trees. Joanna froze, listening intently. "We need to find a way to get her out of the way," she heard Caroline's voice, "before Elton changes his mind." "Of course," replied another female voice, presumably belonging to Roxana from the photograph. "I've already prepared everything. Just one phone call, and Joanna will be declared incompetent." "Wonderful!" Caroline exclaimed with delight, and then continued to elaborate on her thoughts. "We need to convince everyone that she's not in her right mind," Joanna heard as she hid behind the curtain of the slightly open window. "Then Elton won't lose a penny in the divorce, and this house will completely belong to you, while all the property will remain with Elton." "Well, in case of a divorce, of course." "Yes, that's just what we need," Roxana exclaimed. "It seems we've thought of everything. But what if that fool figures it out?" "She won't figure it out. She's too trusting and naive." Caroline's voice was cold and calculating. Joanna shuddered. "The name Roxana?" "Yes, the woman from the photograph." "But she's a medical worker?" The lover whispered. "What if she can prove something?" "She won't be able to prove anything. It's written all over her forehead, loser," Caroline replied, stifling a laugh. "Don't worry, we'll definitely find a way and get the right witnesses. We can say that her mind has become clouded due to all this legal trouble, that she fell into depression. It's not for nothing that Elton described all her shortcomings so well." Joanna held her breath. "But what if she figures out that we set all this up?" Roxana pressed on. "Then," Caroline paused, "she'll have to be silenced." "What do you mean?" the interlocutor asked, a little frightened. "Joanna simply won't be able to tell anyone anything. Who would believe a fool with a nervous disorder? And if Mrs. Benson gets involved, she'll tell everyone how Joanna tried to poison her husband with herbs. So, don't fill your head with stupid thoughts. She's doomed, and in the divorce, she won't get anything. We just need to find the right people, and that's it. Joanna will be sent to the hospital, but this time as a patient, not a nurse," Caroline concluded. Joanna tensed, feeling her hands and legs beginning to go numb. Were they planning to get rid of her? To declare her insane so that Elton wouldn't lose part of his assets in the divorce? So that was their plan. Joanna slowly stepped away from the window, not taking her eyes off the gazebo. Inside, everything was boiling with anger and hurt. How could they sink so low? Elton, whom she loved with all her heart. Caroline, who had seemed to her a fairly decent and rational woman. And this Roxana, a predator ready to destroy their lives for her own gain. Joanna's hands trembled. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She didn't know what to do next. But one thing she knew for sure, she wouldn't give up and would fight for her good name. She wouldn't let them break her, and then all these conspirators would regret daring to touch a defenseless nurse capable of showing her teeth. Fortunately, Caroline and Roxana did not enter the house, limiting themselves to a conversation in the garden. Soon, the sound of an approaching car engine could be heard. Joanna moved to the window. "Ah, it's the same old show," she whispered, seeing her husband sitting behind the wheel. Now everything fell into place. At one moment, Joanna suddenly felt a sharp desire to go out onto the porch and tell this trio everything she thought of them, but then she abandoned that idea, deciding to play the role of the naive fool to the end. Let Elton and his lover think that Joanna would be living in the countryside, supposedly healing her emotional wounds caused by the prolonged trial. But in reality, Joanna would be preparing for battle for her assets. After all, at least 2/3 of the house they were currently living in had been paid for with her salary. Joanna watched the cars drive away, then began to think about what she would tell her husband about her independent trip to the summer house. I wonder what they were planning to prepare for me here. How were they going to declare me insane? Were they really thinking of scaring me like some garden scarecrow? Joanna thought with irony. The sun, high in the sky, bathed the summer house in golden light. Joanna, as if waking from a bad dream, looked around at the unfamiliar landscape and smiled. The village silence, broken only by the chirping of birds, seemed strange yet soothing, and the recent shock and the revelation of the secret faded into the background, giving way to a new, unfamiliar feeling, peace and a desire to escape the noisy city. Deciding to stay, Joanna suddenly imagined how she would spend her days in this quiet and cozy spot. Here, she could enjoy sunsets, walk through the woods, and breathe in the fresh air. At the same time, a thought flickered in her mind. What if this was her chance to start a new life, one without lies and betrayal? A life where she could finally breathe freely. Throwing the unfortunate photographs into the trash bin, Joanna took a deep breath. She really needed a pause. Time to process what had happened and figure out how to get out of this complicated situation. And the summer house, full of secrets and mysteries, had become her sanctuary. Time flew by unnoticed, especially since Joanna kept busy cleaning. Since she had been sent into exile, it might as well be a pleasant one rather than like a stay in a cowshed. At one point, her phone rang in her pocket. It was her husband. "Joanna, where have you disappeared to?" "Mom is worried. She said you left on business, and it's already evening." "Yes, I decided to check out the summer house by myself." "I think I'll stay here," Joanna replied, playing along with her husband, trying to keep her voice calm. "You know, it's really beautiful here, and the air is wonderful. I'm just enjoying nature." "Oh, well, that's fine then," her husband's voice sounded somewhat relieved. "If anything, call me, I have to run." "Okay," Joanna answered and hung up. She had already decided that she wouldn't set a specific time frame for her stay. Let Elton think she was just spending time in nature. The next day, Joanna went shopping for groceries. The village shop was tiny and cozy. Behind the counter stood a plump woman with kind eyes who turned out to be a connoisseur of local gossip. "Hello," Joanna greeted politely. "I'm living here at the summer house and would like to know where I can buy fresh eggs and milk." "Good day," replied the shopkeeper, looking at her with interest. "I'm Lizzie. You must have come from the city. You are new here, aren't you?" "Yes, you're right," Joanna smiled. "My name is Joanna." "Well, Joanna, welcome to our backwater," said Lizzie, her eyes sparkling with lively interest. "For eggs and milk, go to Martin at the farm. He's a good man, helpful. And for everything else, come to me. I'll fill you in on all the latest news." Joanna thanked Lizzie and left the shop. At the farm, she was greeted by a smiling boy of about 10 with funny freckles on his face. This turned out to be Marcus, the owner's son. After listening to her, he immediately ran to the house for his father. Apparently, the boy didn't have a mother. "Hello," Joanna started, seeing a sturdy farmer in a checkered shirt and rough work pants before her. Lizzie suggested I come to you for milk and eggs. "Hello," the man smiled. "I'm Martin, nice to meet you." "Of course, I can help. The milk is fresh, and the eggs are top quality. The hens lay them themselves." "Thank you very much," Joanna replied. "I'd be happy to buy something from you." "No problem," Martin said. "If you need anything else, just ask. I'm always happy to help." After taking everything she needed and putting it into the woven basket Martin had given her, Joanna thanked him once more and headed back to the summer house. The next day, she decided to visit the chairman. She wanted to find out who held authority in the village and what the local customs were. The office was located in a small, old wooden building that looked as if it could crumble into pieces at any moment. Inside, behind a large, time-worn desk, sat a man in a shabby jacket. Joanna greeted the chairman, trying to be polite. "Hello. I'm Joanna Campbell, your new resident. I wanted to introduce myself, so to speak, and find out how things work around here." "Hello," the man mumbled, barely audible. "I'm Michael Charles, the chairman. You found everything correctly. Our rules are simple. Pay for electricity, don't disturb the peace, and live your life." "Thank you," Joanna smiled, jotting down a few points. "By the way, where can I find a paramedic? Perhaps there's some work available?" "I'm actually a nurse." "A nurse, you say? That's a good thing. Just a couple of houses down is the health post," Michael Charles pointed with his hand. "Catherine Davidson is there, always with her books and pills. She's getting on in years and doesn't want to retire because there's no one to replace her." Joanna thanked the chairman and headed to the health post, which turned out to be a tiny wooden house with a small sign written in hand-painted letters hanging outside. Inside, in a small room, sat an elderly woman with horn-rimmed glasses perched on her nose. "Nice to meet you, Joanna," she said. "I've already been informed about you. Lizzie must have been busy. I hope you'll enjoy being here with us." "I'm very pleased to meet you too, truly," Joanna replied. "Well, I heard you're a nurse." "That's good, I could definitely use some help. But first, take a look around and gather yourself. Also, there are risks in the village. We should check your immunity. You might need to get vaccinated against ticks." "Here, take this list," said Catherine Davidson, writing down several vaccination names on a piece of paper. "And really, if anything is wrong, come by and don't be afraid of the new. We're all peaceful here." Joanna thanked the kind woman once again and finally headed home. Closer to evening, Elton arrived, bringing her the necessary items as well as a small bag of groceries. "You've been taking your time on vacation," he squinted, but there was not a hint of regret or concern in his eyes. "Is everything okay?" "Yes, dear," Joanna smiled, still playing the role of the unsuspecting naive nurse. "I just liked it so much in nature that I don't even want to leave." "Well, if that's the case, if you don't want to leave, stay. I'll come by closer to the weekend," her husband shrugged. "Thank you," Joanna smiled. "No problem. Any whim for your money?" Elton tried to joke, but his smile seemed a bit forced. "All right." He stood up and headed toward the car. "Call if you need anything." "Okay," Joanna replied, watching him leave. Of course, she understood that the game was just beginning, as her husband knew nothing about the conversation she had overheard and thought she had simply decided to relax. But Joanna wasn't wasting time. She began gathering information because she needed to learn more about Roxana and the plans of her husband and mother-in-law. Joanna knew very well that she couldn't sit idly by and wait for this intrigue to completely ruin her life. And it was at that moment, while sitting on the porch and pondering her strategy, that Marcus, the boy she had met earlier, ran up to her. "Joanna," he panted, "Catherine Davidson needs you to come right away." "Dad." Dad fell off the tractor and hurt his leg on the plow. Joanna's heart clenched. She immediately remembered the elderly woman who was the local health worker and was now facing such a serious injury. "Where is it?" Joanna asked, trying to keep calm. "In the field," the boy replied, pointing his hand toward the hills that stretched beyond the farm fields. "The ambulance will take a long time. Catherine said you know what you're doing. And she can't handle it anymore. Her hands are trembling from arthritis." Her intuition told her this was serious. Having worked as a surgical nurse in a private clinic for years, she had seen quite a bit and understood perfectly that in situations like this, every second counted. "Then let's hurry," Joanna said, already heading toward the gate. The boy ran ahead, and she walked quickly, mentally preparing for what lay ahead. She knew that in rural areas, people often used equipment without following basic safety rules. Martin might have sustained a serious injury. The health post greeted Joanna with the smell of medicines and disinfectants mixed with the aroma of some herbs. The treatment room was small, with white walls adorned with yellowed posters about healthy living. On the long table stood a cabinet with instruments, a sterilizer half filled with water, and a small first aid kit. In the corner stood Catherine, and her once kind and welcoming face now looked tense. "Thank you for coming, Joanna," she said when the nurse arrived. "Time is running out, and Martin is losing blood. I've applied a tourniquet, but that's just a temporary measure. The ambulance can't get into the village because the bridge collapsed. They're taking a detour. It's quite a lengthy route, as you can imagine." "Where is he?" Joanna asked, putting on medical gloves. A special glint appeared in her eyes, the kind that showed she was ready to take on the challenge. When she shifted into her professional mode. "On the examination table in the next room," Catherine said, stepping aside to let her pass. Joanna went to the patient. His face was pale, and his lips were blue. Martin was clearly in and out of consciousness, mumbling something unintelligible. On his leg, just above the knee, there was a deep wound from which blood flowed. "We need to stop the bleeding," Joanna said, touching the wound. She felt the sharp pulse of the artery. "Catherine, give me gauze pads, hydrogen peroxide, and a syringe." The health worker quickly found the necessary tools in the first aid kit. She didn't interfere with Joanna, understanding that every movement and word could be crucial. "We'll need cold water," Joanna said, examining the wound, "and also, at least a small sterile bandage." "We have some," the doctor said, quickly bringing a small pack of sterile pads. "Good. Catherine, you'll need to help me. We need to stabilize the leg so I can stitch the wound." "What should I do?" "Sorry for asking, dear, but surgery isn't my specialty," the health worker asked, her hands trembling slightly. "Take this board, place it under Martin's leg, and press it firmly but gently against the examination table." Catherine gathered all her strength and followed the instructions. "Now, give me the scissors," Joanna said, continuing to treat the wound with hydrogen peroxide. The paramedic handed her the necessary instrument. "All right, we need to remove any tissue fragments and dirt from the wound," Joanna said, carefully cutting away the splinters of wood that were lodged in the flesh. "It's very important to avoid infection." "Be careful, Joanna," Catherine whispered anxiously. "Don't worry. I know what I'm doing," Joanna replied, not taking her eyes off the wound. She removed all the visible splinters, cleaned the wound, and began suturing. "Catherine, hand me the tweezers," Joanna requested, taking a sterile needle with thread in her hands. "And a bit of alcohol. I need to disinfect the edges of the wound." The paramedic quickly found the necessary tools in the first aid kit, once again confirming her high qualifications and experience in her profession. She could see that Joanna was acting quickly and confidently. Her hands were steady, and her eyes were focused on the task. "Now we need some cotton and a bandage," Joanna said, finishing the suturing. The elderly assistant handed her everything she needed. Joanna carefully treated the wound with antiseptic and applied a sterile dressing. "There we go, now Martin should rest and take antibiotics," Joanna said, scrutinizing the final result of her work. "I hope everything will be all right." "Thank you, Joanna," Catherine said sincerely, her blue eyes filled with gratitude. "You've saved him." "Well, it's my job," Joanna replied modestly. "I just did what I know how to do." Joanna felt that she had truly done everything she could. She had worked to the limit of her abilities. In the clinic, she had only assisted doctors, but here in the rural wilderness, she had taken on the lead role. At that moment, an ambulance finally arrived at the health post with a wailing siren. Joanna stepped outside to meet the doctors. She briefly explained the situation to them and handed Martin over to their care. "You performed the operation?" the doctor asked in surprise, examining the bandage on the patient's leg. "In these conditions?" Yes, Joanna replied modestly. I had to, there was no choice. Well, you're quite the professional, the doctor remarked in admiration, looking at her with respect. Thank you. Joanna smiled. She felt not only like a capable nurse, but also as someone who was starting to earn the trust of the local residents. It seemed to her that she had finally found her place in this remote area that had initially brought her so many unpleasant moments. Seeing the bewildered Marcus standing aside, Joanna approached him and hugged him. How about you come with me? Your dad will be in the hospital for a while. You can rest and have something to eat with me. The usually noisy and energetic boy was quiet and contemplative today. Okay, let's go. Joanna's heart ached with compassion. She understood how hard it must be for the boy right now. I understand it's hard to see this, she said as gently as she could. But your dad will get better soon, and you'll be with him again. For now, you can stay with me. Marcus's face brightened. Really? Of course, Joanna nodded. I'd be happy for the company. Without hesitation, Marcus threw himself onto her knees. Thank you, he exclaimed, hugging her around the neck. Joanna gently stroked the boy's hair, feeling warmth spreading through her palm. And she realized that in this little person, who needed care, she had found exactly what she needed herself. A purpose, a meaning, and someone to distract her from the painful thoughts about Elton. How about you tell me what you like to do? Joanna suggested when Marcus had eaten and calmed down a bit. What games do you enjoy? Well, I love helping my dad on the farm, the boy replied, puffing out his chest with pride. I can also drive a small tractor and mow hay. Dad says I'll be a real farmer one day. Wow, great choice. Joanna smiled. What else? I also love watching the clouds, Marcus continued, gazing dreamily out the window. They're so different, like cotton, boats, or fluffy animals. Sometimes it seems like they're whispering something to me. Joanna smiled. That's wonderful. I also liked watching the clouds as a child and imagining what they looked like. And what did you do when you were little? Marcus asked cautiously, scooting closer. Joanna sighed sadly, recalling her childhood, light and carefree. Well, I lived in a small town. Every summer, I would visit my grandmother and spend my vacation there. My grandma was an amazing woman. She knew all the herbs, their properties, and healing powers. She taught me to recognize them and told stories about each one. Well, yes, for example, chamomile is the flower of the sun goddess, who brings light and joy, and cornflowers are the guardians of the secret sky. They help you find your way home. And did you believe in that? Marcus asked, his eyes wide open. I still believe. Grandma used to say that magic lives in every blade of grass and every flower. I remember how we would gather herbs, dry them, and make amazing infusions, Joanna replied quite seriously. And why? The boy was surprised. To help people, Joanna answered. Grandma was a healer. And I always dreamed of being like her, helping people, healing them, alleviating their suffering. And you became a nurse? Marcus guessed. Well, yes, my dream came true. I work in a clinic and help doctors perform surgeries. That's so cool, Marcus said with admiration. You're like a superhero. No, come on, don't exaggerate, Joanna smiled modestly. I'm just doing my job. And I'm very glad that I can help someone else. I want to become a doctor, just like you, the boy quickly decided. No, I'm just a nurse. A doctor has a very responsible profession. But if you work hard and study, you'll succeed. Inspired by Joanna, Marcus dived back into his studies with renewed energy, asking a plethora of questions on any topic. Joanna patiently answered them, trying to expand the boy's horizons as much as possible. She found it easy and enjoyable to communicate with Marcus. She felt a genuine affection for him, as if he were her own son. Joanna also understood that Marcus was perhaps the only person who could become a true friend to her, someone who wouldn't judge her and would support her in any situation. "I'm sure your dad will be proud of you," Joanna said with a smile. Marcus shyly lowered his gaze. He was still too young to grasp the full seriousness of the situation, but he intuitively felt that Joanna was like his guardian angel. Suddenly, the ringing of the phone interrupted their quiet idyll. Joanna flinched slightly and hurried to answer. "Hello. Joanna. Is this you? I apologize for the indiscretion. This is Donald Benson. I hope you remember your former patient? Donald Benson? Hello, of course I remember. Is something wrong?" Joanna asked, trying to conceal the slight anxiety in her voice. The businessman hesitated for a moment, as if deciding whether to tell the whole truth at once or to reveal it in doses. "The thing is, the situation has become somewhat complicated. Your family life seems to be about to become the focus of judicial scrutiny." "What do you mean?" Joanna felt her blood run cold. Was there going to be another trial? She had suspected that something was wrong, but she could never have guessed that it would escalate to such proportions. "Charlotte, well, you understand, my wife is actively gathering testimonies against you with your husband, Elton." Donald paused here, giving Joanna time to comprehend what he had said. "They claim that you are suffering from a mental disorder and that some of your clinic staff allegedly confirmed this." Joanna's heart ached with pain. She knew what motivated this slander and how difficult it would be to fight such deceitful accusations. Which staff members? And how could they do something like this? Joanna could barely get the words out, feeling tears welling in her eyes. Unfortunately, they're not above using any means to achieve their goals. Apparently, Elton is afraid of losing part of his property in the divorce. It's simple. First, they'll paint you as an unstable individual, and then take everything during the divorce. I don't know the exact names of the traitors within the clinic, but it seems there aren't too many of them, Donald replied calmly. They're probably afraid of Charlotte. Or they've just succumbed to her pressure. I want to say that I know what help you provided me after my surgery, and I'm genuinely grateful to you for it. I'm sorry I was so weak and couldn't protect you in court, but I'll make it right, I promise. Well, what can I do? Joanna felt helpless, like a small girl who had been thrown into a river without a life jacket for the first time. I'm willing to testify in your defense, Donald said unexpectedly. If it comes to court, I'll tell everything I know about you. You are an honest, conscientious person, a true professional. I won't allow you to be slandered. But why would you risk that? Joanna was stunned by his determination. Your kindness, Joanna, deserves respect. And when someone tries to diminish it, I can't just stand by. Donald spoke with warmth, as if they were old friends. You helped me when no one else could. I'll never forget that. My wife hasn't hidden that she's just waiting for an inheritance, and I managed to pull through thanks to you. Thank you so much, Donald Benson, Joanna replied, touched by his words. I don't know what I would do without you. No need for thanks. I'm just doing what I think is right. But be careful regardless. Your situation is complicated. After saying goodbye, Joanna hung up and felt a wave of relief wash over her. In this world, full of deceit and betrayal, there were still people ready to support and protect her. Marcus, seeing her suddenly pale, asked, Joanna, are you feeling unwell? No, I'm fine, she tried to smile, though her heart was literally tightening with worry and concern. I'm just a bit tired. Let's have lunch instead. Sure. I have some delicious raspberry jam, Marcus happily hopped on one foot. Grandma Catherine makes it. That's great, Joanna replied, hugging the boy by the shoulders and kissing him on the forehead. Come on, tell me how your morning visit to the hospital went with your dad. Lunch went by peacefully. Joanna tried not to show Marcus her anxiety, keeping the conversation flowing about his life in the village, his father, and his favorite games. She asked him a lot of questions, trying to distract herself from her true thoughts. Unfortunately, after Donald's call, each day for her felt like grains of sand in an hourglass, counting down to the moment she would once again find herself in the courtroom. Divorce, a word that had once seemed abstract and foreign to her, now threatened to destroy everything she held dear. And the culprit of this destruction was her own husband, who seemed to have completely stopped noticing her. Outside, the birds sang as if mocking her, while Joanna felt an icy emptiness in her soul. Elton had grown bolder and stopped hiding his feelings for Roxana. His calls, filled with cold disdain and mocking reproaches, had become a part of Joanna's daily torture. "Joanna, there's no need to throw a tantrum. Our relationship has run its course, and you're not the same person you used to be. You don't belong in my life. Roxana is much better. I've come to realize that." Every time she heard those words, she felt like sinking into the ground. But Joanna held back, trying not to show her husband how much his words hurt her. She didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing him triumph over her broken heart. "I'm not going to stay silent and put up with your insults," Joanna replied, struggling to hold back tears. "And I don't care how you feel about this, Roxana. I'll handle everything myself. And you'll regret it." "Oh, come on. What a dramatic woman," Elton laughed into the phone. "We'll see how you handle it. By the way, soon you'll be left with nothing and without a place to stay in my house. I've filed for divorce, and believe me, the lawyers are already preparing documents to prove your mental incompetence. You'll soon understand that life without me means poverty and loneliness." Joanna clenched her fists, suppressing the urge to smash the phone against the wall. Resentment burned inside her, but she understood that she couldn't give in to her emotions. She needed to be strong now, to gather her thoughts, and prepare for the upcoming battle in court. Joanna began preparing for the trial. She studied the laws, gathered evidence, communicated with the lawyer hired by Donald Benson, and tried to get ready for any questions that might come up. Each day was filled with tension and anxiety. Finally, Martin was discharged from the hospital. He still used crutches, but he could move around independently. Seeing the haggard farmer, Joanna immediately noticed that he had become more serious, and there was a cold determination in his eyes. "Joanna, I heard you're in danger," Martin said when she stopped by for coffee. "That scoundrel, your husband, wants to take everything from you. You can't let that happen. I know you're a good person, and I will help you. You can count on me." "Thank you, Martin," Joanna said, her eyes filling with tears. "You're very kind." "No need for thanks," he replied. "You saved me. I owe you my life, it seems. And Marcus also thinks the world of you. I heard from Donald Benson that this gang is behaving dishonestly overall. And Donald is a real man, he wants to help you. So I think we can handle this together." After Martin's words, Joanna felt a bit warmer inside during this challenging time when it seemed like the whole world had turned away from her. "Thank you so much, Martin. I would be grateful for your help." Soon, she received news from her lawyer that the trial was set for the upcoming week. Time flew by unnoticed. Each day brought new worries, but Joanna stubbornly pushed them away. During this time, Marcus had become so attached to her that they considered each other family. "Joanna," Marcus said when she was reading documents in preparation for the trial, "don't give up. You're strong and kind, and the best nurse in the world. I'll never forget that you saved my dad." Joanna hugged the boy. His words, full of childlike innocence and faith, became a ray of light in her dark tunnel. "Thank you, Marcus, you're helping me a lot." On the day of the trial, Joanna woke up early. Her heart felt anxious. The courtroom was filled with tense silence. Lawyers, the judge, Elton, Roxana, Caroline, Charlotte, employees from her clinic, Martin, and Donald, all were present. Charlotte, dressed entirely in black, cast a contemptuous glance at Joanna. "Ah, there she is, the culprit of my husband's misfortune," the businesswoman hissed, addressing the judge but not lowering her voice. Joanna met her with a calm gaze. She didn't want to give this woman an inch and knew she had nothing to be ashamed of, as she had already won the first trial. "I warned everyone right away, the court will be objective," the judge said. "Witnesses, please prepare to give your testimony." As it turned out, Donald Benson was the first. "Your Honor, I have known Joanna Campbell for a relatively short time," the businessman began his speech. "But I can say with full responsibility that she is an excellent specialist and a wonderful person. I believe that all accusations against her have no basis. In my opinion, this is simply an attempt by her husband to seize all her property." The staff of the clinic then gave their testimonies, which, to Charlotte's great astonishment, did not confirm her husband Donald's words. Martin also stated that Joanna saved his life, and therefore, he would never believe she could harm anyone. When it was Joanna's turn to answer questions, she spoke about her work, her genuine desire to help Donald, Elton's sudden coldness and indifference, the summer house, and the strange conversations and schemes of her mother-in-law. The trial lasted several hours. Joanna answered questions, holding back tears, tense but confident. She felt that her truth, honesty, and kindness were breaking through all the lies and intrigues that Elton and Caroline Campbell had woven around her. Finally, after a lengthy deliberation, the judge announced the decision. "The court recognizes your marriage as dissolved. All property is to be divided equally. However, the lawsuit by Mrs. Benson to declare you incompetent is dismissed. Mr. Elton," he addressed Joanna's husband, "you are also required to pay compensation for emotional distress. The court takes into account the complicated nature of your relationship. Due to the threats and insults, Mr. Elton, you are obliged to compensate Joanna Campbell for her suffering. You are also prohibited from any contact with your ex-wife, including calls and messages, for the next 5 years." For a moment, Joanna was stunned with joy. She had won, proven her innocence, and protected her good name. Leaving the courtroom, she saw Martin and Donald waiting for her at the entrance with smiles. "Congratulations, Joanna," said Martin. "You did great." "You're a true hero, Joanna," added Donald. "A strong, brave woman. I just helped a little and convinced the clinic staff not to participate in this farce." Joanna felt tears streaming down her cheeks. She hugged Martin and Donald in turn, realizing that she was no longer alone. She had friends ready to support her at any moment. After the trial, she spent several months in the village. This time became an oasis of tranquility for her, where she found peace and forgot about the wounds inflicted upon her. "Joanna, you have no idea how grateful I am to you," Martin said, sitting on her porch and watching the sunset. "Marcus seems to be truly happy for the first time in a while. He keeps telling everyone about you." "Yes. He's such a sweet boy," Joanna smiled. Martin looked at her with tenderness and quietly added, "Joanna, you're so kind and smart. I can't do without you, and I want you to be my wife and Marcus's mother." Joanna flinched. She hadn't expected such a confession, and her heart, which had been closed off to feelings for so long, suddenly fluttered and began to beat faster. "I don't even know what to say." "I love you, Joanna," Martin whispered, taking her hand in his large, calloused palm. "I see how you care for my son. You've brought light back into our days. Please be with us." Joanna looked at Martin and realized that she felt something special for him too. Something warm, familiar, and long-awaited. "I agree." Their wedding was loud and rural. All the villagers attended without exception. Even guests from the city came. Donald Benson started visiting them more often and became good friends with Martin, with whom he began implementing bold projects to develop the region. Together, the partners repaired the school where Marcus now studied and built a bridge that made it easy to reach the nearest town, which certainly brought life back to the remote village. But most impressively, the businessmen installed modern solar panels that provided electricity for the entire area. "Martin, it seems we're making the world a better place," Donald Benson said one evening, watching the sunset over the transformed school. "Yes, and all thanks to Joanna. Her kind heart seems to inspire us to achieve great things." Elton, having lost Joanna, sank deeper into despair. His feelings for Roxana cooled within 6 months. The mistress turned out to be nothing like he had imagined, and the divorce brought nothing but bitterness and emptiness. Elton began to drink, losing more and more of his sense of purpose. He destroyed himself, Joanna told Martin after a while. He didn't find family happiness. He hugged her, pressing her close, and gently stroked her noticeably rounded belly.